When you talk to most doctors about what the healthiest diet is, you're going to be told that a plant-based or a vegetarian-style diet is going to be the best thing to prevent things like heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. But today's guest has quite an opposite view, so stay tuned. Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I am known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's video. Today, I have an interview with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who is an American living in Perth, Australia. He's a professional rugby player as well as a neurosurgery resident. So he is a doctor that knows quite a bit about the brain as well as nutrition. He has studied nutrition from a very young age, as you will hear in this interview. In this chat, we talk about all of those things I mentioned in the very beginning: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and mental health, and how those things can actually be helped by eating a meat-based diet. So I'm very excited for you to hear this interview. And you're actually gonna wanna make sure you are subscribed to this channel because there is a part 2 that I will put out next week. We had a really long conversation, and so I have split this up into 2 parts. Next week, we're gonna talk more about, is ketosis dangerous long-term? Should people do protein-sparing modified fasting? Eating super high-fat carnivore, what that looks like, and are there health implications for that? So definitely make sure you're subscribed so you can get that episode as soon as it comes out next week. But I think you're really going to enjoy this chat and meeting Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Thank you guys so much for listening. And just before we get into the interview, I want to thank the 2 sponsors of today's video. The first one is going to be Optimal Carnivore. I take their grass-fed beef liver supplements every day, as well as give them to my family. You can use my code CARNIVORE to save 10% over on Amazon for these supplements. All of that information will be down in the show notes for you guys. So thank you to Optimal Carnivore for sponsoring this video. Speaking of show notes, the reason I am able to provide show notes is that I do have these sponsors. So you'll find those again down in the information section if you want to skip around through this video. The second sponsor of today's video is going to be Upgraded Formulas. I'm not a huge fan of supplementing things if you do not need them. So with Upgraded Formulas, you can actually get a hair tissue mineral analysis and see what minerals you need instead of over supplementing or guessing. I'm a big fan of their magnesium supplements. I also use their potassium. I just love all of their supplements and what they do, and that ability to precision test to see if you actually need these supplements, right? So you can use my code YOGI12 to save on anything over at the Upgraded Formulas website. All right, guys, I hope that you enjoy today's episode with Dr. Chaffee, and I will talk with you again soon. Have a great day. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming back and tuning in. I am very excited about today's guest. A lot of you guys have asked me to please bring him on. Dr. Chaffee, thank you so much for being here today.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And you are in Perth, Australia, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So, I almost expected you to have an Australian accent, but you're from the United States, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I grew up in California and then Seattle. So sort of, when I was 10, we moved up to Seattle, and then I started moving around a lot as an adult. And I just sort of landed here about 3 years ago. But it's been nice so far. It's quite similar to Southern California in climate and temperament. So it's not bad.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah. Well, I know a lot of my listeners already know a lot about you, but for those that don't, can you just kind of explain your history and what it is that you do? I know we'd love to hear about that.
Sure. So as I said, I'm American born and, born and raised. But I had opportunities with sports and started playing rugby, which is obviously not a very American sport. And so when you want to take that to the next level and play professionally, you have to go to other countries. And so I went to England and played professionally there, and absolutely loved it. Was traveling all over the world with rugby, and was an All-American and did things with U.S. national team and so forth, and did a lot of traveling and playing with that. And so my plan was always to be a doctor. That was always what I wanted to be since I was a kid. But I always loved sports as well, and I always figured you could always go back to school. You can't always play sports at a high level. So I took about 10 years off before medical school to play professional rugby, because I was always interested in medicine, because I was always interested in athletics and my own body and performance. I was naturally very interested in nutrition, and so I studied that since I was a teenager, and then in university and medical school and so forth. And just personally, I found that obviously the traditional thoughts were being pushed, are still being pushed. But then I started coming across other things that really started to change my mind. And I started converting more over away from plant-based lifestyle, which most people are. But I was always meat-based anyway. I always loved meat. I always wanted to eat meat ever since I was a little kid. And so that was always a natural for me. But then when I was taking cancer biology in the University of Washington, we learned just exactly how toxic plants were. And so this is something that we teach in middle school, really. I think it was 7th or 8th grade biology. We learned that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive, and that animals becoming more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and nothing else can. But they can't eat other plants. And so we know this, we teach this, and botanists certainly all know this, that this is a major defense mechanism for all plants to a certain extent. But then we at the same time tell our kids that spinach is good for them,
right?
And so and everything else, and that's been pushed more and more and more, obviously, in recent decades. When I was taking cancer biology, we relearned all this, but we looked at it from a cancer perspective, looking at specific carcinogens in the plants and vegetables that we eat, and they're quite abundant. So we learned that Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens in them.
Wow.
20 years ago, we'd already identified this. Table mushrooms, white mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, you name it, these things had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens each, and they were quite abundant. We've known since the 1980s that from work from Professor Bruce Ames from UC Berkeley, that there are 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons in plants like spinach than the pesticides we spray on them. This is why we still have pesticides. We're trying to ban them all. In the 80s, they were saying, oh, these are poison, these are bad. And yeah, and his point was, yes, they are. The vegetable is worse. And so if you're going to eat the vegetable, the pesticide really doesn't matter. So I looked at that and was just blown away by that. We thought he must be joking. This has to be a con of some kind, but he really wasn't. And it sort of dawned on us and like, okay, this guy's serious. And I remember thinking in my head, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? Even with all that. And he just looked at us and he said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, right, screw plants. And I just stopped. And so that was my introduction into a carnivore lifestyle, I don't know, 22, 24 years ago, whatever it was. And I did it by just not eating plants. And so I'm not eating anything with a plant in it. So I just got eggs, meat, and milk, and that was it. And that's what I ate for 5 years. And I was continuing to play rugby. I was performing better than I'd ever had in my life, and couldn't get tired, couldn't run out of energy. I wasn't getting sore from training hard, which is, very abnormal. And I just felt better than I've ever felt in my life. And I sort of slipped off of that when I was playing in England, because I just didn't really know how significant it was to my performance. But in later years, I sort of came across more information saying like, no, actually humans actually are carnivores. That's the kind of animal we are. And that's what I was doing for 5 years. And when I stopped, that's when I remember not feeling as good and thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just unbelievably amazing as I normally do? Like, am I just not training as hard? Like, what's going on? Well, that was right about the time that I started eating like, breaded chicken and like a bit of, plant-based stuff here and there. And then it slowly slipped off of that. So after that, I was like, right, I knew plants were trying to kill me, just get rid of all these things. I've just been pure carnivore ever since, just meat and water, really, and a bit of, cheese or milk every now and then, but very, very rarely. And that was it. And then I just started diving into the literature. At this point, I was a doctor, and I was taking some time off for my residency program for a family emergency, and then was doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh and the refugee camps there for the Rohingya refugee crisis. That I don't know if people know about this, but in 2017 there was a genocide in Burma where they killed about 200,000 people in a month. Yeah, and then like 1 million people fled into Bangladesh, and so there really wasn't enough people to help. And so I figured because I was taking time off, I really couldn't justify not going. And so it was a pretty intense period, but I went to go help. And so since then I've just been digging into the research. I've now re-entered residency in neurosurgery here in Perth, and do this on the side and do consultations and things like that, and try to help people get better without medicine, and treating the root cause of these problems. Because from what I've discovered and things I've read and the patients I've seen, when you look at human health from the perspective that humans are carnivores as a species, that's just the kind of animal we are, everything just starts slotting into place, because we're carnivores that aren't eating as carnivores. As any zookeeper will tell you, you feed an animal something that doesn't eat in the wild, it gets very sick. But what does it get sick with? It's obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer. Dogs and cats are known carnivores, and yet we feed them grain and plant-based kibble. They get the same things. We get the same things. We used to call these diseases of the West because they only happen in Western cultures. They didn't happen in native populations like in Australia and America. And now everyone's getting them. Now we just call them normal. Now we just call them growing older. Yeah, exactly. And now dogs and cats are getting human diseases at a much higher rate, and they're blaming whatever they want to blame, usually intensive breeding. But you're not going to breed these diseases into a species in a limited number of generations, because these numbers have increased exponentially since the 1970s. So I've just sort of been digging into that and trying to address the root causes of the people's problems, because as I assert, I don't think that these chronic diseases that we treat as a mainstay in medicine are actually diseases per se. I think that they're toxicities, toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet, and a lack of species specific nutrition, namely, too many plants, not enough animals in our diet. And so when you switch people back and get them back to a traditional species specific diet, you find that their diseases just disappear. They actually just disappear. And this shows that cause and effect relationship, that poisoned relationship. Remove the toxin, the toxicity just goes away on its own. And that's what we're seeing. Not for everything, obviously, it depends on what's causing it, but it significantly helps everyone, even if they don't have any problems. So that's really my two main focuses are neurosurgery and primary prevention and preventative care.
I love that. And, I feel like I've seen so much with cancer, and people say, oh, if you get cancer, you should do an all raw vegetable diet. And it's funny, I had a guy reach out to me for coaching with stage 4 lymphoma. And I was like, I'm not a doctor. He's like, just help me eat high fat carnivore. That's all I'm asking you to do. I'm not asking you to do anything else. Just help me do this. And he's now in remission. And it was just like, that's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, he's still done his chemo and all of that, but he has really just eaten, a high fat carnivore diet, well sourced from, a local regenerative farm and organ meats. And I'm just like, wow, that's, that's really amazing. Because I feel like the narrative, and this is why it's so important to have people like you, because when you have letters behind your name, you're a neurosurgeon, you're a doctor, you're obviously an extremely intelligent person to have gotten where you are and do what you do. If I talk about these things, people are like, okay, cool. But if you put credibility behind this, I feel like it reaches more people and it's much more impactful. So I really appreciate all this work that you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. It is like that. People put a lot of stake in letters behind people's names, and sometimes it's warranted and sometimes it isn't. But I'm glad that at least people can maybe take things that I say seriously. But the thing is that you don't need to take you don't need to take it from me. The studies are there. I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. I mean, there are a lot of studies, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of literature that I provide, and people like Dr. Baker provide, and so forth. And Dr. Berry and all these sorts of people. When we talk about these things, we post up
Back it
the
up.
studies. Yeah, exactly. And that's the important thing. And people can decide for themselves. And speaking about the cancer, there's a number of studies looking at a ketogenic diet being very, very efficacious in the treatment of various cancers. And this is because people are thinking now that instead of a genetic model of cancer, meaning that you're exposed to radiation or something like that, and you have a genetic mutation, and that sparks another genetic mutation, and 20 years down the road, you have metastatic cancer. There are now people arguing, and I think that this is probably more in keeping with the observed data, is that there's more of a metabolic relationship with cancer. So when you eat carbohydrates, this changes your metabolism, changes how your body mobilizes energy, but it also changes how your cells mobilize energy. It changes how your mitochondria function, and it changes the number of mitochondria that you have. And there's a number of people looking at this and seeing that when you have poor respiration by your mitochondria, the mitochondria are the organelles in your cells that make energy. When these things aren't working properly, they can actually kick off an entire disease process.
Yes.
And they actually precipitate these genetic changes. And that it's actually more in keeping with the mitochondrial dysfunction that these cancer cells behave as cancer, because there's a guy, Dr. Thomas Seyfried in Boston, who's doing tons of work on this. And he found that if you take a cancer cell, take the nucleus out with all the DNA of a cancer cell, and you put it into a normal cell with normal mitochondria, it doesn't behave as cancer, even though it has all the genetic hallmarks of metastatic cancer. It doesn't behave as such. Okay. But then you take the mitochondria of these cancer cells and put those into a healthy cell that has normal DNA, it does behave as cancer. So that's, again, more evidence to suggest that it's the mitochondria are driving this, and there's a different sort of disease process going on here than just genetics. And he's actually finding that when you put people on a ketogenic diet, because we know, I'm blanking on his name, but anyway, there's a guy who won the Nobel Prize back in the 1930s for this. He discovered that cancer cells really feed on high volumes of glucose. So, when you have your blood sugar, that energy can go into cells. Obviously, when you're not in a carbohydrate driven state, when you're not eating carbohydrates, you run on, you can make your own blood sugar, liver glycogen, ketones, and so forth. So you run on multiple different energy streams. But either way, you're going to have blood sugar. So our cells get energy from blood sugar, but the cancer cells actually suck in about 400 times as much glucose as other cells. So it's really just ripping in the glucose boom. Also because its mitochondria don't work very well also. So it's just ripping in just tons and tons and tons of glucose. So if you limit that, you're limiting the food supply of the cancer cells. So you put people on a ketogenic diet. Now they're not having these swings of high blood sugar. Now their blood sugar is rock solid in the normal ranges, and it's just right here. And he found that glutamine is also something that cancers feed on and need a lot of. And so he had a medication that blocked that in your body, and he found that both of these worked, and both of these in combination worked even better. And so that's very interesting as well. And so there are a lot of people like your client that are just taking this and just seeing if it works for them. And I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more data, because there's certainly just tons of anecdotal evidence and case studies of this being very beneficial.
Yeah, it is. And I just feel like there's a lot of confusion out there, but I love the fact that you bring it back down to the mitochondria. That's been a huge focus on my channel and on my platform over the last year, just because, as we age, our mitochondrial function slows down. After you hit the age of 25, it slows down, and we have to look at all the different things that slow that process down. And eating excess carbohydrates, eating that is carbohydrates out of season, eating excess carbohydrates, it absolutely slows down and makes that mitochondria swell. That can be shown very, very easily. And I think a lot of people aren't really aware of that. I think that nutrition piece is really, really vital when it comes to mitochondrial health.
Yeah, and there are even studies showing that if you go on a ketogenic diet, that not only will your mitochondria work much better, usually about 4 times as well,
Yes, 4
but
more.
you get 4 times as many of them. So
Or
there's like a 16-fold increase in the efficacy of your cell's ability to generate energy. And that has to do with all the cells in your body, including your neurons and so forth. And so this is part of the reason why people that go on these ketogenic diet or carnivore diet, they get rid of this brain fog. They have so much mental clarity and so forth. Also, your brain wants to run on ketones. That's your brain's primary energy source. This is something I learned in biochemistry 2 decades ago. Your brain is always running on ketones no matter what you're eating, carbohydrates or not, or in your fed state or in a fasting state. It doesn't matter. Your brain always running on ketones, and when you're in a fasting state, it runs on ketones. So people think it's like, oh no, your brain really wants glucose. It's like, well, your brain can run on glucose, but when you have high blood sugar, this is actually damaging your body. It's causing direct damage to your body, and so your insulin goes up to abnormal levels and just forces it in. So it's going to be forcing it into areas that it doesn't need to be. And this is why we get marbling in cows. We give them grains, and now they're just stuffing in energy all over the place, and they're getting intramuscular fat. And we like that. It tastes good. There's, that fat is flavor, as the chefs say, but that's happening to people as well. And so this energy is getting stuffed into everywhere, including your brain. So, people think like, oh yeah, that's what your brain runs on. No, actually it's ketones. Your brain's primary energy sources are ketones. And so when you're on a ketogenic diet, when you're on a carnivore diet and your body's running on ketones primarily, you still have blood sugar. It's still in normal ranges. You'll have glucose and, liver glycogen and so forth, muscle glycogen, but it's running on ketones, and your brain wants those ketones to actually work better. And people get peripheral insulin resistance. This is type 2 diabetes, but you can get peripheral insulin resistance without having diabetes. Most people do get this. You get it in your brain as well. And so now you're getting insulin resistance, and your brain can't take up as much glucose. And because your insulin's up, it's blocking out your body's ability to make ketones. And so this is why you sort of feel like crap. This is actually thought to be a driver of Alzheimer's and dementia, because you're getting this
Wow.
insulin resistance, in your brain, and your brain just starts shutting down, it gets weaker, and it starts atrophying because it can't get energy. And there are other factors that play there as well. But one of the things that people find is when they go on a ketogenic diet, all of a sudden just light up and wake up. And there are studies showing that a high-fat ketogenic diet is a better treatment modality for Alzheimer's than every single medication that's ever been trialed. And I think that's major part to do with switching over to ketones, because now your insulin resistance is moot because you're running on ketones now. But also your brain is made out of fat. Your brain is made out of cholesterol. It needs these things in order to function and rebuild itself. Every minute that we're awake, we get low-grade brain damage, and we sleep. This is when we rebuild that. You need sleep in order to get workers to the job site, but you need concrete to build a building. And so you get sleep, and that helps you rebuild this stuff. But if you don't have the fat and the cholesterol that your brain is made out of, which only really come from animal fats, then you're not going to be able to rebuild your brain. Your brain's going to just slowly decay. And this is what we see, a normal atrophy in an aged brain. We get MRIs and CT scans of young people. The skull is full of brain, and then you get older, and there's all these small, empty spaces, and ventricles are all bigger, and there's just half the brain tissue of a younger person. And this is normal, in keeping with age-related degenerative changes, as we'll see on these MRI reports and so forth. I don't think that's normal. I think that that's abnormal. I think that that's from our diet, from eating a low-fat, heart-healthy diet, and we're sacrificing our brains. So there's I think there's a lot that goes into that, but I think that's what people are noticing when they get they get rid of the brain fog and so forth when they go on these sorts of diets, is that those are the two major functions.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And coming from a neurosurgeon, that's it validates it even more. But the Alzheimer's issue is huge. I mean, it is
Mm,
just where we call it type 3 diabetes, but we just see
yeah,
more and more and more of it. And, as that's increased, we have been pushing this plant-based, high sugar diet to people. Eat your fruits and eat
yeah.
your vegetables. And we've demonized meat, we've demonized saturated fat. And, what you're saying is those are the best things that we could possibly be eating, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you look at it, um, you look at when that happened and when these recommendations came through, which were fraudulent, by the way. I mean, we have hard evidence of that.
Right.
It's not
Ansel
even
Keys is a
discussion. And
total
answer, yeah,
liar.
absolute
Yeah.
douche. Yeah. And, but
Yeah.
there are more than that. The Journal of American Medical Association published in 2015 actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 60s showing that they had actually paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify and falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol is causing heart disease and to exonerate sugar, because there's actually a big push on the other side of the literature saying that no, it looks like sugar is actually doing this. And so they're like, well, we need to protect our investment. And so they exonerated sugar and even called it an empty calorie. It's just an empty calorie. That's what it is. That's where that phrase comes from. Those guys. One of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who helped author the 1977 USDA declaration, basically, that cholesterol caused heart disease, and to stop eating cholesterol and saturated fat. And this changed the world. We actually listen, because people have a tendency of appealing to authority, which is like, someone's in charge and they say it, that must be true. I was like, well, no, not necessarily. Just because teacher said so doesn't mean teacher's right. And
Right.
so, and also teachers being paid off. So
Yeah.
that was a problem as well. And so people listen to this, unfortunately, and this changed the health of the country. So just in America, with hundreds of millions of people, we reduced our fat and cholesterol intake by 30%, and we reduced red meat by 33%, 33 to 35%, because obviously that had the most saturated fat, had the most cholesterol. So that was the worst. Same with eggs, right? Well, no,
Yeah.
they're actually the best. And then we increased our fruits and vegetables 30 and 40% respectively, and grains and sugar as well. And what were the results? Well, first of all, the heart disease rate tripled. So you can't say that cholesterol causes heart disease if you reduce cholesterol and heart disease rates triple. Okay,
Right.
that's not even a correlation. Okay, in fact, you have an inverse correlation. In fact, the only thing you could draw from that is that cholesterol may be protective. And in fact, all the big studies post 2015 are all actually showing that. You're having tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients. They're actually seeing no correlation between higher LDL cholesterol and heart disease. And in fact, they're finding inverse relationships. So like higher LDL cholesterol is associated with less strokes, with less heart attacks, with less cardiovascular events. And also people over the age of 60 who have higher LDL cholesterol are living longer. They're healthier. They're having less ailments and so forth. So this is wildly mistaken, and we know it was fraud. So even if we didn't know it was fraud, we know it's wrong. The physicist Richard Feynman said, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. Okay, so we did the experiment. We had hundreds of millions of people in the U.S., now billions of people worldwide. It's wrong. Okay, so you
Yes.
need to throw that out. But we also have we have just hard evidence that this was fraud in the first place. So you have to throw all that out, and you have to start from scratch. And so that's something that I've been trying to do as well, and noticing other things in medicine that are just based in supposition, best guess at the time, but it's just not being borne out by the data. Like if you eat more protein, that's going to be hard on your kidneys. It's a nice thought. You have to cleave nitrogen from protein in order to excrete it in urea. When it starts creeping up, that can be a marker that your kidneys aren't functioning very well. So that can be thought to cause a problem to your kidneys. It's a nice thought. It wasn't borne out by the data. When people actually did the studies and actually looked at it, they found no, that's absolutely wrong. That doesn't do anything. But people still recommend this. You still have nephrologists recommending to their patients with kidney disease. Like, oh, you got to start going plant-based. You got to stop eating so much protein.
Yeah.
You can't eat meat anymore. I'm like, buddy, you need to start reading your own damn research in your own field. Like, you need to stay current. Like, I'm not even in your field. I know this. Why don't you?
Yep.
So, and there's tons of that. There's just tons of that. Unfortunately, a lot of medicine is not based in hard science or fact. It's just, we do the best that we can, and we make an educated guess that is sometimes correct, that's sometimes wrong. It's more often wrong, honestly. And then you get cases of fraud. Those are less common from what I've found, but they certainly exist.
Yeah, it's, anytime I've tried to talk to a doctor about nutrition, it's never really gone very well, just knowing what I know. I had a doctor last summer tell me to stop taking liver supplements because they were full of metals, and I was going to get liver toxicity and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, and then I looked into it and actually found out she was a vegan. She was an endocrinologist that was doing some blood work for me. And I was like, nope, we're done. That's not good advice. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the traditional thought, is that, is that meat is bad for you. And it was all based on that idea that cholesterol caused heart disease and saturated fat increased cholesterol. So they're like, stay away from it. So you can eat fruits and vegetables. You can eat those as much as you want. Those lower cholesterol. That's the only bad thing on earth. I was like, well, actually, like almost everything is bad for you. There are very limited things that are actually good for you. Plants don't want, battery acid. They want water. They don't want Mountain Dew. They want water. They want certain nutrients. They have certain requirements. So does a hummingbird. So does a bee. So do humans. So do dolphins, and so forth. So, diet is species specific. And so if you haven't evolved to eat something, that something is bad for you generally. Meat is generally good for everything. You actually find that even herbivorous animals will sometimes eat meat, and it's actually quite healthy for them. You see sometimes disturbing videos of like a horse just eating a baby chicken, just eating it whole. And or like an elk just like grabbing a rabbit or like a baby duckling and just like eating it. And I've seen it in person at my sister's house. There's a lot of elk that come through, and the little ducklings, they just just go and chomp them. And so these there isn't anything harmful in normal skeletal muscle meat of your average animal, but there are harmful components and toxins in plants because they have to create toxins in order to stop predation, because they're stationary, they can't move. And so they have to use different defenses than mobile animals do. We can run away or fight back. Plants can't, and every living organism has a defense. And so that's something that plants do. And this is universal throughout the plant and fungi kingdom. This is something you just see in everything. And so since we have been carnivores, our ancestors have been carnivores for the last 2.5-3 million years, full carnivores, we have lost a lot of the protections that we had 8 million years ago when our ancestors were herbivorous and then started eating more and more meat and started evolving into what we are today. So we have some protections, and then some ethnicities have had their background in areas that had the agricultural revolution, and so they were eating some more plants, and this was a survival mechanism in certain ways, and so this sort of selected out for people that were a bit more resistant. But it's a bit more resistant. It hasn't become our optimal diet by any stretch of the imagination. One way of looking at that is when you look at, again, the diseases of the West. This is something that happened to Europeans and so forth. But then we went to, America and Australia. We just didn't really see these diseases. Well, now we do. They get them much, much worse than we do. The Australian Aboriginals, when they're eating a Western diet, they get very, very sick. They get huge obesity rates, diabetes rates, heart disease rates, peripheral vascular disease, and so forth. It's a common practice here in Australia as doctors, when you're treating one of the native Aboriginals, whatever their age is, say it's 48, you just consider them at 68. You just add 20
Really?
to, yeah, you just add 20 to their age, because that's basically the demographic that you're thinking about. Like these are the diseases that you're going to see. These are the problems that you're going to have to think about, because they just age prematurely and they get very, very, very sick. Well, they don't if they don't eat Western diet, if they don't eat sugar, if they don't drink alcohol and so forth, if they're just eating their natural carnivorous diet, just animals that they hunt in the wild, they don't get these diseases at all. In fact, there was a study that looked at going back to their traditional diet for very, very unhealthy people. That actually, they lost a ton of weight and they reversed their diabetes and heart disease and all these sorts of things. And sometimes damage is done. You can't go back on everything, but
Right.
everything was able to be reversed. And that's something I actually remember hearing as a child when I was in California. I remember, on some sort of program, it was talking about how when on a Western diet, Native Americans were 4 times as likely to get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and so forth. And I remember thinking at the time, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the
Right.
food and we get the disease, we just get it at a lower rate. And, and what's a Western diet and what's a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? And they didn't say it at the time, but the answer was a pure high-fat carnivore diet. Look at the Inuits,
Yeah.
up at the North Pole. They don't have any plants to eat them if they wanted to. They're just eating, seal blubber and so forth. I remember seeing that as a kid. I was like, well, isn't that going to kill them? Isn't that going to cause heart disease? Shouldn't that make them fat? Like,
Yeah, because you grew up when I did, we grew up in the 90s and everything was the
yeah,
fat-free era back then. And
right.
that's how
Yeah.
we were. It's funny, you talk about growing up and really just loving meat. I was the same way. There was a place called Ryan Steakhouse here. It's kind of
Yeah.
a chain, but I remember as a kid, I would just beg to go to the Big R. Like I wanted to go just get a steak, like as a 5-year-old. My mom thought it was hilarious. So we'd go. But then as I got older, as I was a teenager, it was SnackWell's fat-free cookies
Yeah.
and fat-free chips. And I felt all this pressure to just eat all the fat-free foods. And
Right.
I was put on my first antidepressant at age 14.
Right.
I had some situational stuff going on, but food impacts your brain so heavily. For me, I've been off of all medications for years now, no SSRIs or anything. And the big thing that's changed for me is meat-based diet, lots of meat, lots of eggs, lots of fat, lots of saturated fat, and no sugar,
Yeah.
and it's just astounding how food really impacts not only our heart health, but also just the brain health. And I feel like there's just this huge mental health crisis going on in our country and around the world as well with these different diets.
Yeah, I think so as well. And, at the same time that all of these diseases increased quite rapidly, mental health issues and depression, anxiety, and so forth, all increased as well, as did, neurodevelopmental delays such as autism and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
There's a friend of mine, Natalie West, she's a psychologist over in Melbourne. We were on a debate recently with the Australian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine as well, on basically arguing for carnivore versus vegan diet. And so we had 3 people arguing for at least a meat-based, if not a carnivore based approach. And then 3 stone cold vegans. And it was an interesting debate. And she argued from the mental health side of things. There are a ton of studies in psychiatric journals showing that people with lower LDL cholesterol are actually having higher rates of depression and anxiety. Not only that, but that those with lower rates of LDL cholesterol and depression have a much higher rate of suicidality. So, psychiatrists that know about this are pushing their patients to get their LDL cholesterol up to protect them. She talks a lot about this, not even just depression, but mental health disorders in general. These things are very much tied to the things that you eat and can be exacerbated infinitely by eating the wrong things. I've just noticed, just anecdotally in myself and with a number of patients and so forth, that just greens cause a huge problem for me. I was just carnivore, when I was just getting back on it, and my my parents were wanting to try it as well. And so they went on it. And my mom was cooking this big roast, and she, loves cooking, do all these sorts of things. So she was, trying to put all these spices and seasonings and just literally just crusting this with just every plant she could find. It was literally just green on the outside. And I was just like,
No,
yeah, because
don't do
she was
that.
just trying to find an end route around this. Like, and I was just like, well, Mom, you're not supposed to eat plants. That's really the whole point. It's like, no, we're not having any plants. It's just the meat. Yeah, we're just having the meat. I was like, no, but you're putting plants on the meat,
All over
and she was like, but that's just the meat. It doesn't count. I was like, yeah, well, you can tip cocaine in your coffee too and tell yourself that you don't do cocaine. Oh, there's just coffee. Oh, that's all it is. But no, there actually is something else going on there. So she ended up making that, and I was over there for dinner, and I was just sort of like, oh, should I scrape this off? I really don't want to eat this, but I didn't want to be rude, and that was it for. Now I just don't care. I'll just scrape it off. But
yeah,
at the time, I was sort of like, oh, well, I don't want to appear to be rude, and also I was just curious. Okay, I was like, okay, well, let's see. What will this do? Will this affect me somehow? And so I had a couple pieces of this lamb with this herb crust on it, and I became very upset. I was sort of overreacting to little things in the dinner table conversation, and I became extremely depressed and very upset, to the point of I'm honestly, I was contemplating suicide. I was just like, I don't want this anymore. I want to end this. I'm just so done. I remember thinking to myself, oh, it's just sort of like waking up in my own consciousness and just saying, I shouldn't feel like this. There was nothing that happened tonight that justified me feeling like this, but I do feel like this. And so I realized, like, this is pathological. Something's happening to my brain chemistry to make me feel a way that I really shouldn't feel. And so I remember thinking to myself, just sort of making a deal. I was like, okay, just go to bed, just go to sleep, and reevaluate in the morning. If I still feel this way in the morning, I'll kill myself in the morning. I actually said that to myself.
Wow.
And I woke up in the morning, and I didn't feel like that anymore. I felt just basically emotionally numb. I remember thinking to myself, what the hell was that about? Why the hell did I feel like that? And, was I just completely overreacting to what was going on? Or, what else? Was it the damn herbs on that stupid lamb? And so I was like, well, there's only one way to find out. So I tried the lamb again, and I was depressed the rest of the damn day. But at least I knew why I was depressed, and I was miserable. And now I had a focus of it. I was like, stupid plants. And I was like, never eating you bastards again. And so I've noticed that in patients as well. And this is one of the things that, ketogenic people do, is they'll drop carbohydrates, they'll drop sugar, which is great. Those things are absolutely terrible. But then they'll think, well, I need to get my nutrients, all the nutrients and the vitamins are all going to come from plants. Wrong. All those things are coming from meat. And sure, you'll have vitamins and nutrients in plants. Plants are living things. They're going to have things in them that are beneficial for other living things, but they're also going to have a lot of things that are detrimental. And so you're getting, the good with the bad. So a lot of these people eat a lot more of the plants and greens and make these big salads all the time and so forth.
Yeah.
And they can actually run into a lot of harm. Famously, Jordan Peterson ran into the same.
Oh, yes.
issue. Yeah. And he was just basically eating ketogenic diet, a high fat meat-based ketogenic diet.
Meat and greens. Yep.
Yeah. But he was still very depressed and had very bad anxiety. And his daughter, Michaela, convinced him to just try a carnivore, just a strict carnivore, just drop the salads and just try it for a month, see what happens. And he did. And after, sort of 2-3 weeks, the anxiety issues, if not went away, significantly improved. And, he looks at it and went, salad was doing this to me? And
yeah.
So, yeah. And so this is something that I see as well. And I just sort of mention this to people that are having issues with their mental health. It's just like, look, you can just get rid of that last little bit, and see how it affects you. And I've found that people are responding very well to that. I don't know exactly what's going on in the greens that are doing that, but we definitely are seeing something. And we certainly know that cholesterol plays a role as well.
Definitely. Well, that's a lot of my story as a yoga teacher. I've been teaching yoga for 12 years. was really trying to do like a low meat, high vegetable diet. It was basically
Mm.
paleo. And the reason I turned to carnivore is because a doctor friend of mine was like, look, just try this out. I think that a lot of the stuff that you're dealing with, I had
Mm.
joint pain. I mean, I love doing like pretty fun athletic yoga. I couldn't do it anymore. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I guess it's because, I'm in my late 30s and she's like, no, just try this. And all the joint pain, the indigestion, the bloating, the eczema, and the mood just shifted within probably 2 weeks. And I was back
Wow.
in the yoga studio doing all the fun stuff that I love to do without pain. And I was just looking around the room like, oh my gosh, like there's all these vegans in here and I'm here
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
better than I have felt in years. And all I've eaten for the last, couple weeks here is meat. And
Yeah.
that's how the carnivore yogi name was born, because it was a joke. I was like, what if I
Yeah.
started a whole thing about being a carnivore yogi? But I mean, that's the only way I was able to go back to teaching and go back to practicing, was that I got rid of the plants that were really causing me issues. And the thing that you say about the mental health, that's why I stayed carnivore. I was like, I'm just
Mm.
going to do this for 30 days. I'm just going to try it. At the end of the 30 days, I was like, if I could keep this mental clarity and this feeling of happiness, I got to keep doing this. And that's why
Yeah.
I stayed on it, was just like, I didn't feel depressed. I didn't. And I just naturally have had issues with depression, anxiety since I was a kid. And it was like, wow, that's just gone, and
Yeah.
I love sharing this with people because I feel like, there's so many, like half my friends are on, Zoloft or Prozac or
Right.
just on so many medications. And it's like, it doesn't have to be that way.
No. Yeah. Um, yeah, my, sort of depression runs in my family as well. And I've certainly had issues with it throughout the years. And I'm, yeah, much more, just even tempered and just mellow and happy now. Obviously things can still get me down, but that's just part of life. But I don't get pathologically upset where I'm not able to cope or handle with my situation because of how upset something gets me, or if nothing gets me. And that's a problem that a lot of people have, is that they have so much anxiety and so much depression. They literally can't leave the house. They just don't want to get out of
Yeah.
bed in the morning.
Yep.
And they can't do the things in their life that will improve their life and make them happier people in general, because they're just so unhappy in general because of this pathological state. And I try to express that to people as much as I can. And some people take the advice and some people don't, but
Yeah.
you can only do as much as you can. Yeah, I bet, like in your yoga community, yeah, it would just be tons of vegans. Like
It's
I
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, I wonder like how well they took that. Usually they don't take it
Well,
very
I've kept it quiet. I mean, I have you have to search for me to find it. Like, people in my real
well.
life don't know about the Carnivore
Ah,
Yogi podcast or YouTube.
yeah.
They've started finding it because it's been happening for about 3 years now. And it's
Okay.
funny, I was just texting with one of my students this morning. She's been a student of mine for about 8 years, and she's just was texting me to thank me because she's been following all my stuff and she's been actually implementing it. And she's like,
Oh, great.
I can't believe how much better I feel. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's funny. She just kind of found me, and I don't really push it out to people, just because I will get a lot of flack from,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's, there are some people who are open-minded, and I do have friends of mine that I'm like, look, you should not be this anxious and depressed. And I'll
No.
tell you, as being in the yoga community for as many years as I've had, there's so much anxiety, there's so much depression, there's so many mental issues among teachers. I'm
Yeah.
like, guys, maybe this vegan thing is just not working. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not it's not helping.
Yeah. And I mean, that's supposed to be something that people would normally, associate with, good mental health. You're meditating, you're doing
Yeah.
yoga, this
Oh
mental health,
God.
body health sort of connection. And yet people are, it's probably, a lot of these people are living behind a bit of a facade, and they're just
Very
sort of
much
trying to
so.
keep it
Very
together.
much.